So, yes, it's finally that day. The Diablo 4 review embargo has lifted, and right now, Diablo 4 is getting widespread praise from reviewers and critics. But yes, there are some notable concerns going forward, including that shop, as you can see right here. It has absolutely ridiculous prices. This is concerning. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in a moment. Also, something very surprising out of the reviews, it looks like PvP is much better than anticipated, and the in game itself is absolutely amazing, which is great news. We'll also talk about some of the problems, including some issues with the story. No spoilers, by the way, with the story, so don't worry about that. We'll also be talking about tackling the capstone dungeons, going for max rank level 100, what's that like, and much more. But yeah, first of all, let's start out with those reviews, and we're going straight to, guess who? IGN, to see what they have to say. Now, they did rate it a 9 out of 10. And they said it's amazing, but they did also have concerns. So let's go straight into it right now. I was on to say this: if you're hoping Diablo 4 would shock the ARPG world with its massive innovations to the genre, however, you're likely going to be disappointed in that specific regard. Now, I wanted to say something about that. You know, for me personally, that's no big deal. If it isn't broke, don't try to fix it. That's always my slogan that I go for when it comes to things like this. Just try to build upon it, and to me, that's what they've done here with Diablo 4. For me personally, that's not a concern. All right, so it says this: instead of trying to revolutionize ARPGs in any major way, Blizzard mostly seems content to play it safe by making smart but unsurprising changes to the formula, with things like more customizable skill trees and more diverse playstyles between its iconic character classes. Now, this series has had a lot of catching up to do in the 11 years since Diablo 3, and whether it's borrowing combat inspiration from Path of Exile or online elements from Lost Ark, there isn't really anything about what Diablo 4 does so well that is completely unprecedented. But while there may not be much in the way of game-changing innovations, the good news is that lack of experimentation has resulted in a game that's unbelievably well-designed and succeeds at practically everything it tries. At least that's how I felt when I played the Server Slam, the beta, open beta. I felt like they had made sure to have a fine middle ground between innovating and nostalgia and keeping people happy with what they love, what they know, what they're familiar with new stuff, you know? So I feel like they tapped into that there. So yeah, there's apparently some concerns about the actual story here. Again, no major story spoilers. You don't have to worry about that. This is just about pacing and things of that nature. So it goes on to say this: but before you get any real payoff for what's expertly set up in the first act, you'll spend the vast majority of the next 4 going on tangentially related errands with more filler than a packing peanut factory before finally getting back to the task at hand. Okay. Now, it says the result is an interesting but disjointed story with a payoff that doesn't quite stick the landing. The real shame is that anytime Lilith is on screen or closely involved in whatever action is going on, it's absolutely engrossing stuff, but she's largely hidden behind a curtain waiting for the final act for the vast majority of the campaign. And the diversions you're sent along the way consistently feel like unnecessary detours. Combine that with some seriously disappointing boss fights. Whoa, I won't spoil, especially the campaign's final one, and it's hard not to feel let down by what this could have been. So again, a lot of this stuff is subjective from IGN, but I'm kind of curious what happens here. From my personal experience from the story, I was very much invested. Now, I imagine that they might have areas that have you taking on different story arcs from different characters. That's my assessment. Kind of like what Star Wars has been doing with a lot of their TV series lately, is that it feels like there's some fetch quest episodes there. I'm hoping that they're not too prevalent throughout this story, but yeah, it sounds like it's a little bit of a concern. Now, most notably, the biggest concern to me is some of these boss battles, which are apparently somewhat underwhelming. I'm a little bit worried about that. We'll see how that pans out, of course. I have heard actually from other reviewers that yes, some of the dungeon encounters, some of the dungeon bosses in particular, do get redundant because they are similarly placed throughout different dungeons. Very similar bosses. So yeah, that's also a little bit of a downer there. But yeah, it is pretty cool that Nightmare Sigils will be useful to change up the dungeons in some ways and to add extra challenges. More on that in just a moment. We're going to talk about the in-game. But get this. It goes on to say this. There's a little bit of a tease and a bit of a cliffhanger, apparently, at the end of the story. We don't know what that is, of course. But that's good news because it tells us that there's going to be more to this game. So it goes on to say this. The ending of the story is at least nicely sets up a whole host of possibilities for Diablo 4's live service future and inevitable story expansions, but I find myself excited about the potential of where things might go more than I'm happy about the base campaign we got overall. It's no wonder that Blizzard allows you to skip the campaign entirely for every character you make after the first time you complete it. A 5-minute recap video would be just as effective as replaying the roughly 15-hour story. Wow, shots fired here. That might have been more disappointing if this brief campaign were meant to be the main course of this meal, but thankfully rolling credits in a Diablo game means you've only just finished the appetizer. So at least that's the cool part out of that paragraph, but that sounds very, very harsh towards the actual story here. I am so curious to see what people say when everyone gets their hands on this game. Now, what I have heard, this is interesting, from what you guys have actually played, is some complaints when it comes to classes. When you are playing, like, for example, as the Necromancer, and the story isn't, like, matching your class and jiving well with actually who you are, and your character isn't commenting on Necromancer stuff going on in the world, then we're seeing some problems. So I'm kind of curious to see how prevalent that sort of thing actually is, because you got to remember that the druids have like specific story arcs and missions when they reach Scotchglen. So I'm hoping that you hear comments from your druid, of course. If you're playing as a druid, I would hope he would be commenting on his own region. That would only make sense and would add a lot to the game, at least in my opinion. Now, let's talk about what really matters, which is the end game. So check this out. This is what they have to say about that. When it comes to the things that really matter in the long run, like combat, build crafting, hunting for gear, and especially the end game, Diablo 4 absolutely knocks it out of the park in practically every way. Even if they aren't perfectly balanced, all 5 character classes are a ton of fun to play as. The rogue darts around to deal extreme damage, either in melee or from afar, with a deadly bow, an exhilarating high-risk, high-reward trade-off. Now, the sorcerer creates horrifying cocktails. Okay, so we get it, yes. The classes are all very different, unique, and cool. We got to experience that, of course, in the betas ourselves. So they are like, hey, this is great. Now, this is where it gets very interesting, because I thought this was kind of going to be like an afterthought with this game, and that, of course, is PvP. So they go on to say this: PvP is possibly the in-game activity with the longest tail. Oh, really? So they say this right here: I was around level 43 when I finished the campaign, but at level 50, you'll also be ready to tackle the first capstone dungeon, a mostly by the numbers dungeon that serves as a power and skill check in order to unlock the 3rd world tier, and which grants access to a variety of new activities and loot drop ranks. Some of those are called Helltide events, a completely awesome type of activity where blood begins raining from the skies. Ooh, that's cool. In certain zones, and uber deadly enemies swarm everywhere. Now, killing them and collecting nonsensically named aberrant cinders without dying allows you to open special chests that are positively crammed with sacred loot. Alright, so it says this: but PvP is possibly the in-game activity with the longest tail. Please tell me more. You'll find 2 PvP zones in Sanctuary where you compete to slay NPC enemies to collect materials while keeping your head on a swivel to defend against rival players who might decide to kill you and take your resources for themselves. Kind of reminds me about another little game called The Division, and I think that's actually really cool. The Division had really cool mechanic with the Dark Zone, so for them to kind of take this on in Diablo 4 is very neat. Alright, so it says running around in these chaotic zones is completely nerve-wracking and hilarious, especially since even your own party members can betray you by scoping up the valuable materials that are not shared between players, leading to rifts in even the strongest alliance. You might even be tempted to leave the party to rid yourself of that pesky friendly fire protection and lash out at a former ally. This is the type of dynamic stuff I love when they introduce it into PvP. I don't know if many of you played the second Kane & Lynch, but they had a multiplayer mode with that called Fragile Alliance. I always loved how unnerving it was to go in there to do a heist, but you never know who is going to betray you. So this type of mechanic is actually really, really cool. I personally really do love it. Now, we got to talk about one of the more concerning things about this game, and that, of course, is microtransactions. We're going to head over to GameSpot, who gave the game an 8 out of 10, and one of the reasons is because they are deeply concerned about the future of the game and microtransactions. They go on to say this one right here. I've gone on record as being skeptical about Blizzard's monetization plans for Diablo 4. In general, I find the idea of purchasing cool-looking loot in an ARPG to be anti-ethical to the genre. Apologies to fans of Path of Exile. And live service games change their monetization schemes all the time. Just ask Destiny 2 players how many iterations of monetization that game has gone through. That's a great point. Finally, the prices of these bundles of pixels are, to my eyes, obscene. See the $25 outfit in the gallery above. So yeah, let's go ahead and check that out. Actually, I want to see this. I want to see this madness, of course. So they go on to show this right here. Check it out. We have the Wraith Lord. Of course, this is a cosmetic bundle that you can get for your Necromancer. It's going to be only, $25. Dear God, that is steep. You got to remember that this game starts out at $70 at its standard edition. So for them to add on this type of pricing with their shop is just insane. And then you have this right here as well, the Crypt Hunter bundle, which of course is a mount and a bunch of other stuff. That's going to cost you only $20. It used to be, if I remember correctly, that an expansion, you can get an expansion for like $30 and you would get countless hours of content, stories, cinematics, new characters, classes. I mean, look at what The Witcher 3 did with its expansions. And I'm kind of curious to see what they do with Cyberpunk 2077 and Phantom Liberty. I mean, more bang for your buck what it used to be like. I mean, we live in an era now where you can't even freaking afford a home, I guess it's the norm just to drop $30 for one cosmetic for like the Necromancer. To me, that's absurd. Now, of course, if I back it up, hold up, you got to remember that the game itself, if you ignore the shop, you can do that and you will find amazing stuff within the game itself. So I'm not hearing about complaints that, oh God, they're withholding some of the coolest stuff and just dumping it into the battle pass, dumping it into the shop. It does not seem to be the case. Now, of course, that may differ in the future. So that's where the big concern comes in with this monetization scheme. People are very, very worried what's going to happen next. What's going to happen in 6 months to a year when they get the install base, with the millions upon millions of users playing the game. And they're like, gotcha. Here's the real monetization scheme. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But again, this is Activision. We'll see. I'll keep you guys updated. Hopefully it's not bad news in the future. But let's keep going because go on back to the review to IGN. They go on to say this right here. Part of what helps make each option feel unique are the class mechanics that unlock at various points in the campaign. For example, the sorceress gains access to the enchantment system in Act 1, which allows you to enchant a couple of their spells to augment how they work. I use one of my enchantments on the teleport spell to turn the standard dodge. Every class gets into a second teleport cooldown, greatly improving my mobility. Then each class also has their own unique twist, whether it's augmenting your ranks of the dead as a necromancer or bonding with spirit animals to gain beastly enchantments as a druid, which we did not get to really see during our server slam time and beta. And that goes a long way to making your playthrough and build crafting on each character feel distinct in some really cool ways, which this game is going to be very, very replayable, which is exciting. Now, I also read from GameSpot when we talk about skill trees, they kind of do wish there were more depth to that as well. But let's get back to this right here. They go on to say this: there are just so many ways to interact with your build and make smart use of your gear. For example, whenever I outleveled a cool piece of gear with an effect I loved, I could extract its key perk and keep it in my inventory to be imprinted on a more powerful piece of equipment down the road. And thankfully, Blizzard has backed down from its previous promises to make skill tree respecs prohibitively expensive. Instead, they merely hurt your in-game wallet enough that switching high-level characters to a new build is a serious consideration, but not one that's impossible or sends you straight to the poorhouse. This is great news. This is one of the things we were concerned about, and now we can confirm, apparently, that you really don't have to worry too much about respecing your character when you are further into even the in-game, it seems like it's very possible. Now, it says, after 80 hours on a single character, I was still discovering new ways to tweak and improve my build or new equipment perks that open up exciting possibilities. That makes it very difficult to log off, even when I found myself playing nearly until the sun came up once or twice. So, yeah, it's another thing. Pace yourself. I actually saw a Reddit post about that to pace yourself on this one. But let's talk about level 70 and beyond, and even hitting max rank. What does that take? What's that like? So it says, then at level 70, you get another capstone dungeon to unlock the final world tier, which gives you access to even better loot, tougher enemies, and more experience. And then, yes, there's yet another final in-game dungeon designed for level 100 characters after that. The treadmill of things to conquer is so well designed, I didn't want to get off, even when I felt like I had seen 95% of what was on offer. Now, GameSpot, on the flip side, said that they really don't care for the game to be so much of a treadmill. It's almost too much of a treadmill, that they like to hit, max rank with their character and then kind of loot and discover things. So yeah, I'm kind of curious about your take on that one. But I love the current gameplay loop. So yeah, treadmill worked for me. Now it says the whole time you work towards the max rank level 100, you're earning Paragon points to make your character even more deadly against your increasingly formidable foes, which serves as a carrot to keep grinding your way through the Tree of Whisper bounties, Helltide events, and PvP zones. Now, even after more than 80 hours on my primary character, I haven't reached level 100 yet, but there's a cap on both leveling and earning additional Paragon points once you do. A smart move away from Diablo 3's philosophy of letting players earn nigh endless stat increases in favor of a system that forces you to make meaningful choices with the limited upgrades your Paragon boards can contain. I prefer that approach to the bloated monsters that Diablo 3 characters were known to become, and the in-game grind to reach that max level is practically perfect in terms of variety, replayability, and build crafting, and more. And then we're going to see a whole layer on top of all of this that was just mentioned in this review: seasons. So seasons haven't even been discussed in this review or any reviews from what I'm seeing, of course. They haven't got the chance to experience that, so I'm curious to see how that's going to be layered on top of all of that. But yeah, the game isn't perfect. Apparently there are some bugs that we do have to worry about. Now, the good news is that Blizzard has officially said that yes, there is going to be a day one patch, so hopefully a lot of that stuff is ironed out. But here's what they had to say about the bugs and issues. They say, hopefully some of those updates come sooner rather than later, too, as Diablo 4 does suffer from a few nasty bugs at the moment. For example, if you enjoy teleporting around as a sorcerer, be prepared to get stuck in the ground literally hundreds of times, as Blizzard apparently didn't account for vertical geometry changes when zipping around the top-down levels. Yikes. Thankfully, the issue can be resolved by just teleporting back to town, but it also forced me to retrace my steps to my original location, wasting tons of time, only for it to happen again when I teleport a few minutes later. There's also some weird rubber banding that sometimes goes on when you try to go from one region to another that prevents you from entering a zone. In some instances, my friends and I had to use one another as teleporting waypoints to get into regions we were completely unable to enter. Now, most of Diablo 4's issues are extremely specific things that will likely get patched, but they were bad enough to tangibly impact my enjoyment a bit in the meantime. So they still ended up giving it 9 out of 10 with their verdict, so it didn't impact it enough for them to be like, oh, I completely give up on this game, it's trash. No, that's not the case whatsoever. They definitely go on to recommend it. So overall, a positive experience with some worrisome things in the future for the game, especially potential predatory monetization schemes happening with the shop. In my opinion, it is just absurd that they would even consider having something $25 in the shop that is a skin. At max, I was expecting those skins to be like $10 at their most premium. Considering this is not a free-to-play game, this isn't like Fortnite or something, or, Battle Royale Modern Warfare where it's free-to-play. So, there's just no way around it. It just sucks to see. But overall, it sounds like this game is stellar beyond what's happening with the shop. If I could just only ignore the shop, I'm curious to see how much worse potentially this could get with that. But what's here, I'm going to enjoy it. And I personally cannot wait to dive into the story despite some of the issues apparently the story having, because I myself found the quality of the cinematics to be amazing. They did mention that the quality of the cinematics are stellar, and it is cool to see your created character in the cinematics. But yeah, I'm still super hyped, even with its problems. I'm definitely going to play the hell out of this one. So yeah, look out for more Diablo 4 news and updates. I have you guys covered, and I will see you all next time. Take care.